All right, directors, if you want to just take your places, then I think we're ready to go.
Yes.
All right, everyone, I just want to give everyone a few last seconds just to wrap up. And great, thanks everyone. So welcome to the Tuesday, June 25th, 2024 meeting of the Comox Valley Regional District Board. And I just want to recognize there are a couple of alternate directors today. We have alternate director Wells, who's sitting in for director Hillian. We have alternate director Swift sitting in for director Grant. And we have two directors. Another alternate director would be Mike LaRock sitting in for director Grieve. And we also have Director Brown attending virtually online. And so with that, I just want to acknowledge that we're gathering today on the unceded traditional territories of the Comox First Nation, the traditional keepers of this land. And as is our practice, we are working our way through the calls to action. This is call to action 51, equity for Aboriginal people in the legal system. We call upon the Government of Canada as an obligation of its fiduciary responsibility to develop a policy of transparency by publishing legal opinions it develops and upon which it acts or intends to act in regard to the scope and extent of Aboriginal and treaty rights. And the first piece of business is a recommendation for an in-camera meeting, if someone wants to move that. Okay, moved by Wells, seconded by McCollum. Any discussion? Anyone opposed to post the in-camera resolution? That passes, and we'll do that. We'll move in camera at the end of the open meeting. And the next item of business is the June 11 minutes for adoption. Okay, moved and seconded. Any questions on those? Seeing none. Any opposed? And that passes. And we have a delegation to start with from the Mount Washington Resort Association. We have Tim Defert and Cara Wickford, and they're both online. So we'll just pass it over to them.
Hello, my name is Tim Devert. I'm the current president of Tourism Mount Washington and have been for the past, I think, 10 years. So we've been asked to provide an overview of Mount Washington Resort Association, doing business as Tourism Mount Washington. I can tell you that I've been involved since the first day. I worked at Mount Washington for the previous 18 years, and it was incorporated as a society in 2007 at the bequest actually of our ownership group at the time. And since that time, it's collected revenues through the MRDT, as well as it used to collect revenues through a membership program, which is no longer the case. It is strictly now an MRDT collector. There's no more memberships. We did a lot of work with the Olympics during that time. We did used to have a full-on director that ran the organization, but once we became a model that did not have membership, we went to a volunteer board only. In that time, we have Mount Washington Resort itself used to fund the initial start of the organization with $50,000 annually until the MRDT could be started to be collected, which took a couple of years. And please jump in with questions anytime. This is not something I'm normally doing. So the annual MRDT is somewhere now between $60,000 and $70,000 annually, which in the world of marketing is not a lot of money, but does a few things. We did opt up to the 3% in the last time we renewed as well. Currently, one of the issues is we're not collecting from a lot of the Airbnbs and those types of operations. I'm not sure how that's going to work out. The majority of is collected through Kona Vacations, which is Carla, and through Mount Washington, which has slopeside accommodations. That's the majority of the money. So some of the projects that have happened in the past, supported the sale of Mount Washington to the newest team, did some Olympic training in 06, 08, and 2010, contributed to the Strathcona Park trailhead improvements, Mountain Training Center grant funding. We've done some stuff for the local community as well in terms of après ski campaigns, movie nights, mixers, pancake breakfasts, things along those lines. But the majority of what we try to do is to drive overnight business, which is what the MRDT is slated to be used for. It was also one of the bigger ones was the Pride Week and Seafood Festival, which drive overnight business quite well. There's been some mountain biking and some Nordic skiing promotions as well. Of course, through the pandemic, things changed and we actually did better because Mount Washington did much better through the pandemic. And then we kind of restarted the organization after that, promoting different things. So going forward, I can let you know now that this will probably be one of the last things I do as I've left the mountain and am not a stakeholder much anymore, but I stuck around just because of the history that I have with the organization until somebody new can take over. We are, so our new 5-year business plan is connected here. I'm hoping you're all seeing the same thing I am. We are going.
We're not seeing that. If you're, we were wondering if you're under the assumption. But
I was under the assumption.
If you'd like to take a moment and
maybe I could share my screen. I can
get a screen sharing, and if you want to go back briefly and.
I can do that. Yeah, let me just.
Okay.
How do I screen share? Anybody know? I'm share. There we are.
It's that button down in the middle at the bottom. Trying to check with you in the chat as to whether you are attempting to screen share. We can see it now then.
Okay.
Okay. Great to figure that out. Thanks, Tim.
Sorry about that.
Not a problem at all.
I'm a Teams guy, not a Zoom guy. So anyway, I'll go back to sort of a little bit, just briefly through the beginning. Most of what I said is not required to see pictures, but so the overview again, incorporated back in 2007. Used to be a membership structure until we got the MRDT. MRDT is now our sole source of income in the $50,000 range. We have supported Olympic venues, lots of different things as well over the years. Lots of Nordic training. That was a big one for a long time. Mountain biking events, Seafood Festival, Elevate Wellness. These are all things we've done to drive overnight business. Pacific Group Resorts purchased the resort 7 years ago. We kept it going. And there have been more and more events going on over the time frame. Here's some of the events right here. The Mountain Training Center funding. It all kind of came out of the Olympic time frame. Some of the pre-pandemic marketing initiatives we did were movie nights, Pride Week, Beer and Wine Fest, ski-free campaigns, après ski campaigns with the Valley. That was a big Valley one where we did most of the après skis in the Valley, which worked really well when we coordinated with the Valley hotels. Since then, we've done some more event starts with Elevate and Pride, and specifically the Seafood Festival, which was a big one, which filled lots of rooms up there. We are currently rebuilding the website and a few different things. So going forward, our new 5-year business plan for the next 5 years is to continue with our visitor and outdoor guides and trip itineraries. Lots of summer and shoulder season campaigns. This is all directed specifically at accommodation on the mountain. Winter is not an issue on the mountain as much, but summer and shoulder seasons are. Trying to develop some events. Also trying to do some local events for the residents that are up there to enhance a bit of a community feel, which help to drive a little bit of overnight business as well. We need some website and SEO improvements as well. So going forward, the one thing we do need to do is join together with the Comox Valley with their MRDT programs to create more of a regional approach. Because personally, I'm a big believer in a rising tide lifts all the boats. So the more people that can get to the valley and to their hotels will eventually get up to the mountain and their hotels, and vice versa. The mountain, in the winter, for sure, a lot of people stay in the valley, supporting the MRDT down there while skiing up at the mountain. We do packages with lots of the local hotels and different things along those lines. So there's definitely a synergy between the two that should be explored and built upon going forward. We do need to strengthen our brand at for the mountain, for the areas up there. That's a big one. And that's working in coordination with the resort. So as I said before, I'm currently the president, chair, whatever you want to call it. Carla is one of the directors, and we have another director who is our treasurer. So we're a little bit weak in terms of a board presence. That's something that's a big focus going forward, is to get a new board in place to continue to build it up as we go forward. So here, that's really the whole presentation. The idea is to go forward. In my mind, is really to join with the CVRD's MRDT programs and build a regional presence. They will continue to drive room nights up at the mountain as well as in the valley.
All right, thanks, Tim. And even with going back slightly, you still managed to get it in under 10 minutes. And okay. I appreciated the visuals. It's always nice to see Mount Washington. So that was a pleasure. Yeah, no problem. So I'll open it up to questions. And I think first I'll, as the request here is for a letter of support, I'm just going to pass it over to staff to touch on that briefly, and then we'll go to questions. So our CAO.
Sure. Thanks, Mr. Chair. And thanks for the presentation, Tim. Yeah, I think it was important that the presentation be given to the board here, because that letter of support is being requested for the MRDT to be provided to Mount Washington Resort Association. There's a couple of aspects that are looked for, and the couple of those aspects be that there's information sharing between the eligible entity and the local governments who are being asked to provide those letters of support. That would be consultation around the 5-year action plan or the 5-year strategy that you're undertaking, and just that there be a good understanding of your association by the board. Normally, this board does not consider actions at the board meetings at which delegations occur. But what I could suggest is that an option for the board to consider, and of course there's a Q&A here opportunity for directors to ask, but an option that you might want to consider to the board is asking that CVRD staff engage with Mount Washington Resort Association to develop recommendations going forward. And I heard your interest in working together with other MRDT programs. Of course, the CVRD is in the midst of our tourism strategy at the moment. And so it might be very appropriate for the board to suggest to CVRD staff to work with the Resort Association and then come back with recommendations around your request for a letter of support. So I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, thanks for those comments just to frame the discussion. Appreciate that, CAO. And we have alternate Director Wells.
Thank you, Chair. I guess my question, because one of the requests is at least in the request that's in the agenda, was for that 5-year renewal. How do you see the works in terms of I don't know if you want to call joining or merging the two MRDT processes, and in fact potentially a third if the whole valley joins in. Are those conversations, have they already started? And just wondering if you've tested the waters there.
I believe the Comox Valley MRDT program has approached us at one point to collaborate a bit more. I'm not sure if it's actually joining together as one big MRDT, or is it just leveraging funds between the two. But yes, we've had some discussions about them already. And I mean, it's a no-brainer to join together. We don't make enough money to really do anything substantial. So anything that we can join to get a bigger bang for our buck is going to be well worthwhile doing.
Okay, thanks very much.
Great, thank you. And Director Moore.
Great, thank you, Chair. Thanks for the presentation. I saw, as you quickly scrolled through the slides, reference to the affordable housing piece. The province is, I believe there's a sentence in there about that. And you probably know that Courtney is going, down that route in terms of utilizing that. And I guess I'm wondering if you have any comments around that in terms of Mount Washington. I'm sure that staff housing is a huge issue. Yeah, just curious to know your thoughts on that aspect of it. Thanks.
There is a staff housing shortage at the mountain, of course, and it has been for years, but it's really up to the resort to provide that housing. I don't think that would fall under affordable housing because it's temporary staff housing. Other than that, there's not a lot of year-round residents up there, and I'll be honest, the housing up there is not affordable in terms of more along the lines of, if you're looking for affordable housing, you also need transport to go along with it, and some kind of services, which the mountain does not have on a year-round basis. So I'm not sure if that's really relevant to that, but if we're joining with the Valley MRDTs, there's potentially some ability to use some of the funds for that.
Thank you.
Okay, and just going to check and see if there's any questions online from Directors LaRocque or Brown. Looks like no further questions. So Tim, thanks very much for the presentation. And as the CEO was saying, we don't make decisions the night of a delegation, but we'll give this thought at our next meeting. Appreciate your time, you and Carla. Thanks very much.
I know.
And then we're just going to move on to reports. And the first one is also online. This would be Reid Bailey from the BC Ministry of Agriculture and Food. And there's no motion for receipt required, but never hurts. All right, and I'll hand it over to you, Reid, if you're ready. And are you wanting to share your screen?
I'm gearing that up right now.
Okay, we'll let you know if that's not happening. Looking good. It's looking good.
Looking good.
We're seeing the corn.
I'm glad you're seeing some corn. Okay, yes, perfect. Thank you very much. Yes, my name is Reid Bailey. I am the team lead of the land use planning team with the Ministry of Agriculture and Food, here to give a brief presentation on land use planning for agriculture. So just what I'm going to run through today, talk about why agriculture is important to our province, talk about 6 big points, the big pressures on farmland in BC, some tools in the toolbox for local government officials to consider. Then I'll go through some key messages, key actions, and finally some discussion and questions. Oh, you know what? This isn't in presenter mode. Here we go. Sorry about that. There we go. That should be a bit better. Okay, so why agriculture? Yeah, it's worth pointing out, agriculture is a significant contributor to BC's economy, and the sector is growing. Income from farming increased from just over 4 billion in 2020 to 4.37 billion in 2021. So, $300 million increase. And it's worth comparing to other sectors as well. The oil and gas sector, for instance, was just over 4 billion, so less than agriculture in 2020. Employment figures tell a similar story about the importance of agriculture to the provincial economy. Agriculture does support BC jobs and family businesses. In 2022, there were 31,000 people employed in primary agriculture across BC, versus 17,000 for forestry and logging, which has traditionally been viewed as the backbone of our province's economy. And it kind of goes without saying, but food security, it's more important than ever. The UN reports that the global food crisis is only going to get worse due to things like global conflicts and our changing climate. So really relying on food imports is fraught with problems, and we should be growing as much food as we can. Turning our minds from economic activity to some of the pressures on farmland, it should come as no surprise that arable land in BC is very limited and under great pressure. This is the first of 6 key pressures facing the agricultural land reserve and the farming industry. Other ones include the cost of ALR land, urbanization, housing, demographics, and a lack of industrial land. And I'll talk about each of these in turn. It's interesting to note too that none of these pressures are really anything new. All these pressures have existed in some form or another for the past 50 years, which is the primary reason why approximately 50 years ago the Agricultural Land Commission and the ALR were created. It was directly in response to some of these pressures. And the difference now, however, is many of these pressures are just much more severe than they were back in the 1970s. So yeah, I'll talk about these in turn here. So you can see on the right-hand side, there's a map of BC, and the green represents the agricultural land. It does represent a mix of agricultural capabilities. So there's a variety of different soil types where you can grow a variety of different crops depending on which category you're in, or classification, I should say. You may have heard the stat out there that 5% of BC's land base is in the ALR. That's technically true, but it's actually quite a misleading stat. For starters, 7% of the ALR is not available to farming. And what that means is, picture a large, big block of ALR land where there's 100 or so properties. Within that big block, you're going to have bodies of water, you're going to have roads, perhaps federal lands. So things like this. So land that you can't actually farm, although it's technically in the ALR. And of greater concern too is 54% of the existing ALR is Crown land. And you can think of Crown land, there's so many competing interests on Crown land for things like mining, forestry, and recreation. So it's very, very challenging, if not impossible, to buy land as fee simple to start a farm in this day and age. And it's worth noting too that some non-ALR farmland out there does exist, but it doesn't have the same regulatory protections as land that is in the ALR. The next pressure is the cost of BC farmland, which unfortunately just continues to rise. The average cultivated farmland in BC increased by 8% in 2022, and that was on the heels of an 18.1% increase in 2021. And BC land values are, on a per acre basis, are by far and away the highest in Canada. And if you look at specifically the South Coast, there's $139,000 per acre. Easily the highest price in Canada. This, and what's in second isn't even close. And to give you a comparison, Ontario ranges from a low of 4,000 to a high of 28,000. It's pretty expensive on the island too, as you likely know. It's the average per acre basis in the island is $63,000. So again, quite high. And we're seeing an increased demand and a limited supply that's contributing to these higher values. Farmland near urban areas is seeing huge pressure from things like hobby farming, rural residential lifestyles, and investment properties. The third one is urbanization. As most people are likely aware, BC is a great place to live, but with the exorbitant costs of housing, a lot of young people are choosing to move elsewhere in Canada. But having said that, on the whole, our population is growing and showing no signs of slowing down. Urban infrastructure follows as more people move to the province. You're likely aware of this. More people moving to your area means more water, more sewer, those kinds of services that need to be delivered. And really, there's these 3 areas of significant high growth that we have targeted. This is the Lower Mainland, the Okanagan, and Southern Vancouver Island. And in and of itself, this isn't a problem, but from a farming perspective, this is a huge problem, because this is where 80% of BC's total farm cash receipts or income from farming is generated. Here is the same thing I was just saying, displayed on a map here. So you can see these 7 regional districts highlighted in yellow. This is where 77% of our population lies, and 80% of the income from farming is generated. So you have a lot of people living in a relatively small area where the majority of farming receipts are generated. And associated with urbanization is housing demands. Everyone knows that our housing prices are higher, and they just keep going higher. And this is really the case for both to purchase a home and to rent one. I feel like I've said this about 10 times, but again, not surprisingly, BC is the most unaffordable province for housing, which explains that movement of people out of BC into Alberta. And it's worth noting too that this isn't just a Lower Mainland problem anymore. For years and years, prices in the Lower Mainland were really blowing up. The rest of the province was staying reasonably level. not anymore. About 5 or 10 years ago, everywhere else started to rise, and you're really seeing this ripple effect of people moving out of Vancouver into secondary markets like Victoria and Nanaimo, Kelowna, and then people from those areas moving into kind of tertiary markets like Courtenay, Comox, Cumberland, etc. And because of this, more people are really looking to the ALR to solve the housing crisis. And I'm here to tell you, maybe we shouldn't be doing that. First off, it's worth noting it's called the Agricultural Land Reserve. So put another way, it's land that is reserved for agriculture. Land that might not be suitable of agricultural production today, might be tomorrow or next week or in 10 years. And with changes in technology and the economy and changes to our climate, just because there's a vacant property today doesn't mean that it can't be a productive farm tomorrow. So something to always keep in mind is really the ALR is not the solution to BC's housing crisis, nor is it the solution to local government planning on housing. Not trying to criticize local governments at all, far from it, absolutely. What I'm simply trying to say is that it's too easy and tempting for people to look at unused ALR land and say, look, there it is. There's our solution to our housing crisis. That's really not the mindset we should have, and I think that as a province and a country as a whole, we still have not adopted the build up instead of out mantra. And it's worth noting too that more people living in the ALR just equals a lot more headaches for everyone, particularly farmers. There's a huge increase in traffic and people driving farther distances. People unfamiliar with farming, moving into farming areas generates more complaints. You think of the one of the things that happened during COVID was a lot of people were moving out of urban areas into rural areas, and these were the first people that were complaining about normal farm practices simply because most of them are unfamiliar with farming practices. But this is a huge drain on farmers, and more strain on infrastructure as well. Again, I kind of briefly mentioned that earlier. Many rural areas are simply not equipped to deal with a big population influx, given all the services that they do require. The fifth pressure here is demographics. Most people are probably aware, again, the average age of a farmer just keeps rising. We're now up to 57.8 years. It's the oldest, we're the oldest province in terms of average age for farmers in Canada. And depressingly, fewer people are getting into farming. This is not good. This is a huge problem. There's a lot of reasons why this is happening. A lack of affordable land is certainly at the top. And a kind of a lack of interest too. A lot of young people don't want to farm. It's very hard work. It's very challenging work. A lot of people are opting to do what I do, which is get a degree and work for government, right? So again, another challenge. And it's interesting to note too, this is kind of a feel-good thing. BC does have the highest proportion of female farmers in the country. The last pressure I will go over here is lack of industrial land. This is more relevant to Metro Vancouver, but again, it kind of relates to the whole province because what happens in Vancouver often spills out into other areas. But there is a critical shortage of industrial land in Vancouver, and this is putting significant pressure on agricultural land. It's quite mind-boggling. It's industrial land's up to over $7 million an acre in Metro Vancouver. That's just staggering. And not surprisingly, redeveloping industrial land is incredibly profitable, and it does generate quite a bit of tax revenue for local governments as well. Industrial lands too, they do tend to offer a lot of employment opportunities. There's lots of well-paying jobs here, so there is a huge benefit, but it often can come at a cost to farmland. So I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this because there's a lot of information. Hopefully these slides have been emailed around to you, but here's some tools and how local governments can help BC through agricultural land use planning. So the first one is the Local Government Act or the Community Charter. You can consider supporting agriculture with things like developing an agricultural advisory committee, developing an agricultural area plan, having more favorable tax and water rates for your farmers, things like that. Regarding the Minister's Bylaw Standards, so our ministry has published what we call the Minister's Bylaw Standards. These are standards that we encourage local governments to adopt when updating their zoning bylaws in farming areas. And these consider things like property line setbacks and size and siding for residential use. So we encourage local governments to adopt these. I know Comox Valley has done such for many of them. There's the Farm Practice Protection Act. Yeah, it's important to recognize that farming businesses following normal farm practices are protected from local government nuisance and animal control bylaws. Another thing to keep in mind, We also have what we call our agricultural land use inventories. This is where our GIS team goes out and surveys the whole area of agricultural properties, and to get a feel, to get an accurate account for the agriculture occurring on the ground. So utilizing this data in your reports and plans is often beneficial. Regarding the Agricultural Land Commission Act, yeah, it's just important to recognize that the ALR is a provincial zone where agriculture is the priority use. Adopting the ALR regulations into your zoning bylaws and plans is really important too. It's important that the local governments know that many of the regulations cannot be prohibited by local governments, but they can be regulated. And lastly, the ALC has a whole host of really useful policies and bulletins that really explain in plain language the regulation that's in place. So these are very handy and useful for local governments and their staff. So 2 more slides here. I'm just getting to the end. Key messages. So first off, the competing demands for our limited agricultural land are growing. Everyone in this province really wants to live and play in BC's limited valley bottoms, which is just a reality of our geography. The challenges for farming are growing. Again, the price of land is rising. Encroachment of residential and industrial uses just puts more pressure on farmland and farmers. Food security requires having a land base. This kind of goes without saying, but we're not making any more farmland, and we never will. So converting farmland to other uses is often permanent. And protecting this provincial asset requires both a provincial and a local government effort. Sometimes we think like, it's just farmland, it's just the province to manage. But in reality, there's a role for local governments to play. And local government elected officials can and do make a difference in supporting farmland, farmers, and BC's ag sector. So last slide here, some key actions. So yeah, really encouraging you to help BC farmers succeed by reducing the burdens within your control. So some of those tools that I just went over a couple slides ago. Help create stronger buffers between farmland and other uses. Good fences really do make good neighbors. Coordinating with local government neighbors to enact bylaws impacting agriculture that are consistent, fair, and easy to understand. It's great if everyone's on the same playing field. It makes bylaws much easier to comprehend for farmers and ALR landowners. And really recognizing that non-farm uses do have a cumulative effect on the ALR. And that's it for me. There's my contact information. I should have also said that Tom O'Dell, a regional agrologist for the ministry, is also on this call. But yeah, we're happy to take any questions that you might have.
Great. Thanks very much, Reid. That was a really useful presentation. And you may or may not know, but we're going to be reviewing our draft agricultural plan later this same meeting. So this just sets the table really well for us in terms of context. And there are a few questions out there, more than a few. So I hope you're able to stick around. I think the first one I saw was in the room, and that was Director Hardy. So please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. It's a good thing Director Grieve isn't here. Thanks for the presentation. I guess there's 2 additional pressures based upon a lot of discussions with a number of folks within the rural communities of the Comox Valley. One being water and the other one being forestry. And I was surprised that your presentation didn't make mention of that particular pressure. I know here on Vancouver Island over the last few years with heat films, etc., there's been some real scary experiences for our local farmers. I know, I think Waterlands and Air came to the Comox Valley back in March and gave a presentation with regards to, again, water conservation. So I'm a little surprised, like I said, Reid, that your presentation didn't talk about water. The second item revolves around forestry, and of course, majority of Vancouver Island is operating under private forest managed lands, and of course other forestry activities as well. And when we start looking at culverts that get put in for logging roads, etc., but water that would ordinarily go down different crevices and into aquifers, etc., are being diverted in other directions and not necessarily feeding our aquifers anymore. So huge concern that I hear from our constituents and our farmers revolve around forestry activities. I guess the comment or question that I would have for you is, I understand it was probably about 3 years or 4 years ago, Forest Lands and Natural Resources was doing a review of the Private Forest Managed Lands Act. and engaging with a number of folks on Vancouver Island to possibly make some changes to that act. That report, my understanding, was supposed to come out about 2 years ago or so, and I still haven't seen or heard anything about that. So I'm just wondering if you might be able to provide some further comments on water and forestry, if you don't mind. Thanks.
Yeah, Tom's laughing. I'll pass it over to Tom in a sec, but a great point about the water. The reason I didn't bring that up is purely a jurisdictional thing. Our ministry basically has almost no jurisdiction over water, and I don't know enough about it, and I'm not comfortable to speak to that because that is a walrus thing. But Tom, do you have anything to add? Looks like you're chuckling.
Well, I thank the director for his comments and question. Water is at the top of mind for everyone in the ag sector. I have a small farming business myself, and it's a huge issue for us. I just want to point out we are trying to get more proactive in our communication with the local ag community, and that's why we're putting together the Solom Low Flow Working Group, which I believe you've been invited to. I also want to mention there's an opportunity right now for the regional district to apply for funding to do feasibility studies and planning around additional water infrastructure, both for the residential purposes, but also for agricultural purposes. There's a couple different programs out there at present. I'd be glad to talk with you more about those opportunities. And I think it's, we went through a recent round of planning on the Solom. There was an agricultural water plan for the Solom River. And there were some options laid out in there that could be further developed through some of this funding. So I hope we can engage further on discussion of this.
Director Hardy, you had a follow-up, please.
Yeah, thanks. And going back to Mr. Reid, with your comment revolving around water doesn't fall under our jurisdiction and consequently we can't talk about it, doesn't work for our constituents here in the Comox Valley. What we're hearing is this is a very, very important item, water. And again, if we're talking about supporting the agriculture sector, if we're talking about food security, if we're talking about this, that, and the other thing, supporting the agriculture sector, then we need to make sure that there's water available for those folks moving forward. And again, just trying to understand where water, lands, and air protection, or what I refer to as lands and water, in agriculture, who develops the policy for lands and water to go about doing their business at the end of the day? Is it them that develop their own policies, or is it the agriculture that develop the policies and then it's water, lands, and air that goes about implementing things afterwards? With regards to the programs for that you may mention, or the grant dollars, again, one of the biggest things that we're looking at is water monitoring here in the Comox Valley, and whether or not that particular program or projects would help us with regards to acquiring those assets, so we can start doing some more fulsome water monitoring projects in the Comox Valley. Thanks.
Yeah, I know that. Again, I realize that's a completely insufficient answer, and I'm not trying to pass the buck there. It's just that the water is under Walrus's Waterlands, their purview, and I know they've been doing a lot. They've learned from some mistakes, put it that way, from last year, and they're doing a lot more outreach this year with our ministry as well to try and basically touch base and really with producers in the agricultural sector before any drought occurs. But it's tough for me to comment beyond that.
Regarding whether there would be funding for monitoring, I'll look into that a little further and follow up with you, Director.
Great. Okay. Thanks very much, Tom. And maybe we'll go to a question online and then come back to the room. And I'll recognize Director Brown.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks so much for the presentation, Reid. That was really great. On your slide where you had the different levels of government sort of and what actions we could do, you sort of skimmed through the municipal piece a little bit. And so in areas where there isn't agricultural land reserve, the Comox Valley has some ALR for sure, but there's loads of land here too that is not in the ALR. And then there's also, you know, a movement towards smaller scale farming, which it seems appropriate given the topography of Vancouver Island, and also the limitations of water. And I just wondered if you had anything more to say about encouraging that small scale farming aspect.
Yeah, I mean, well, it's interesting. So first off, you being the landowner could apply to have land included into the ALR. That's an option. That's something that the ALC receives inclusion applications every year. And the second thing is just, again, having kind of more favorable bylaws towards agriculture. So especially on property outside of the ALR where local government has full control over zoning and what happens, permitting agriculture as even just a principal or permitted use. And allowing other types of agricultural activities to occur on those lands is a big step forward. Yeah.
And can I follow up, Chair?
Please do, yeah.
And so I'm also curious whether or not I understand the ministry tracks census data on farming, so information that way, and then through ALR or the ALC. But is there any tracking of other small scale farming, either whether that would be through, I don't know, the data that farmers markets collect or some other mechanism? Is there a way that we can look at how much food is actually being produced in an area and what that, so that we can determine need and create a sense of urgency potentially in our communities to get people growing food? I really liked your kind of opening comment, which was we should be growing as much food as possible given current global trends and climate change. I just think that's really important, and anything else you can add to that would be great.
Yeah, so we do have our agricultural land use inventory projects. And so again, just to rehash, that's where our team goes out and surveys all the agricultural land uses occurring in an area. That project has been given a big boost in funding and staff over the last several years. There is an aggressive plan to not only survey the whole province, but keep conducting routine follow-up surveys every 5-6 years, just to understand how the land's changing and what crops are being grown where and what changes we're seeing. To speak to the farmers market piece, I know we do have a branch in our ministry that works with farmers markets. I don't know directly exactly what that entails, but they do track numbers and what have you. But yeah, the ALUIs are a really, really good tool.
Thank you.
All right, thanks very much, Director Brown and Reid. And I'll pass it over to Director Morin.
Great, thank you, Chair, and thanks so much for the presentation. I'd say you're very brave being on the hot seat, because I think this is an area that many of us are pretty passionate about, because we do hear from our residents and farmers about all the pressures that you listed, as well as others. I appreciated Director Hardy's comments. They covered off some key points that I wanted to make, and just kind of giving you a sneak peek into the ag plan that we're going to hear cover later. The first goal that was listed is steward water resources to meet agricultural water needs. So it's obviously a huge piece of the puzzle. I understand that they're separate ministries. I am going to take a couple minutes to share. I hope you give me a bit of latitude, but a while back we had a meeting with this was with the city, I believe, but we had a meeting with Ministry of Health and talked to them about housing. So can we have housing combined with infrastructure for health? And they thought it was a great idea, but they said it's just not really something that housing and Ministry of Health doesn't really get together much, So we hear that kind of thing quite a bit, and there's really, I think, opportunities, and not just opportunities, but I think responsibility in a way to have more interaction between the ministries, particularly where these things hugely overlap. The point I wanted to make, and I guess ask you about, was your slide around the economic contributions. It doesn't surprise me. It's quite striking. Often what we don't see is huge economic drivers, things like arts and culture, which also is an area that contributes hugely to the economy, and we don't recognize it. And it also surpasses industry in terms of the economy. So we see that the economic contribution is more than the oil and gas sector. And I guess I'm wondering if you can share with me what kind of support is the farming community receiving? Because we know that oil and gas sector has been heavily subsidized over the years. And when we went on a wonderful farm tour recently, we heard that the farmers are not making virtually any profit at all. So I'm wondering, that huge economic contribution, like who's getting that money? And also if you can share any supports that farmers are getting, because I did see on the list for regional district and local government to maybe lower water rates and things to help farmers. But I'd love to know what provincially what's happening to support farmers, considering that they are contributing hugely to the economy. Thanks. That was a lot, but I felt like those were important points to make. Thank you.
Yeah, Tom, can I pass it to you for the support piece? That's really your wheelhouse as opposed to mine there.
Yeah, I guess supports fall in a number of categories. There's technical and business development support. So there's a new entrant strategy. I guess I'll start with that very briefly. We're trying to encourage more people to get into farming by providing business planning and other financial related training for new entrants. Then in terms of direct economic support, I would say the main things are crop insurance and the agri-stability and agri-recovery programs, so that when farms have a loss of income on a whole farm basis, or they lose a crop, there's financial support to help with that. I think a lot of the decline in profitability of farms, and I can speak from personal experience on this as well, has to do with increased input costs and increased costs of labor without any increase in value for our products. So this is a fundamental of the current economy, and I'm not sure what the solution is to that from my own personal perspective. I'd be glad to give a more fulsome description of some of the ministry's programs, but off the top of my head, I don't want to spend too much time without more preparation.
Did you have a follow-up, Dr. Morin? Okay, all right, thanks. And we'll go back online and we'll go to alternate director LaRock.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Reid and Tom, for that presentation. I'm representing actually Director Grieve today in our Area C as a large contingent of agricultural land and farmers. And last week I was sitting in the Planning Commission, Advisory Planning Commission for Agriculture in the Comox Valley. And there is a great deal of concern from local farmers. I'm wondering, and it comes from a variety of areas, and you've mentioned many of them. One of the things I didn't hear that I heard last week was that there is a divide between the understanding of the urbanite, who is used to getting their produce that is internationally grown, compared to a locally produced product, and also the farmer's difficulty in getting access to even the local community in competition with some of those products in the large stores. I'm wondering about what kind of resources are available for local government to increase public awareness around locally grown products and access to it.
Well, a great one, not specifically local to, your regional district, but local to the province is BC does have our Buy BC program. And that is, you've probably seen that maybe in your grocery store where, locally grown products is the little symbol there. There's multiple intakes for funding a year. It's a free program. We do offer funding for those applicants who are successful. And the program has been fantastic. It has really boosted a lot of smaller companies' notoriety as well as their profits. So that's a great one. There's multiple intakes a year, and it's always fully subscribed, so that the program's had a lot of success.
Did you have a follow-up, Director LaRock?
That is very good. Thanks very much. I'll
Okay.
follow up with that, with the Director Grieve.
Okay, great. Thanks very much. And in the room, we have another question from Director Hardy.
Yeah, thanks. Just a comment, a follow-up comment with regards to the agricultural land inventory and in the review of ALR. I'm just wondering what was the last time the ALC visited the Comox Valley to do a review of the agricultural lands in the Comox Valley. And the reason I ask this question is, again, when we're sitting in discussions in Electoral Area Services Committee with regards to development permits or allowing for houses to be built, additional homes to be built on agricultural land, often we'll get these applications that come in and say this particular piece of property isn't really viable for agriculture. We've lived on the property for 20 years. It's just a big pile of rocks, but because it falls within the ALR, there's not a whole heck of a lot that can be done. So I guess where I'm going with this is, again, wanting to know when the last review was undertaken, and again, whether we're looking at these ALR lands through a lens with, if you can't farm on it, then possibly that's a location where you could maybe build a house. And then going back to properties that aren't on ALR but are great farming properties, maybe bringing those back into the ALR. So kind of looking at, if you take some out of the ALR for housing, that additional properties get put in that aren't necessarily registered as ALR lands as a means of compensation. I'm sure that's already been looked at or considered, but I just bring it forward again. And then the other comment I had revolving around, pardon me, I know there's a lot of folks that would like to see local food that's produced here in the valley, the ability to have access to that. And one of the problems that we run into is we really don't have a home base, like a real home base for a farmer's market. So again, there's been some conversations revolving around how do we set up or establish a permanent home for a farmer's market, and whether or not there's some programs out there through BC Agriculture that might be able to help us out with pursuing that. Thanks.
Yeah, so the first one on the status of the agricultural land use inventory, the last one was done for Comox Valley RD in 2013. So, over 10 years ago now. So that's due for an update. And we want to update that within the next few years, and not 2024 or 5, but hopefully 2026. We're not making any guarantees, but that is an area we do want to get up to. Regarding the housing comment / land that's unsuitable in the ALR and land that's suitable or maybe shouldn't be in the ALR, it's interesting you bring that up. I used to work for the Agricultural Land Commission itself, and when I worked for them, we undertook what we call the Boundary Review Project. So we actually looked at the ALR boundaries in the regional district of East Kootenay, and the focus was identifying lands in the ALR that maybe shouldn't be in there because of their lack of agricultural potential, and vice versa, looking at land outside the ALR to possibly include it in that has ag potential. And that became a very political project very fast, and it abruptly got canceled. And I'm just giving that context to say that reviewing agricultural boundaries in an area is very time consuming. It's very challenging, and it faces a lot of roadblocks. That's not to say it shouldn't be done. It's just that past experience hasn't maybe led to the most desirable outcome. So not sure if that's something that's going to be pursued in the future. And Tom, can you quickly speak to the farmers market one? I'm not. Yeah. Okay.
I can.
Yeah.
There is a food hub program. Comox Valley did apply for and receive 2 rounds of funding for planning a food hub, which would have included potentially a permanent home for the farmers market. Unfortunately, they weren't successful in competing for the most recent round of funding. I think that was partly due to a lack of a shared common vision among all the participants. For these things to work, you really have to have a champion and a really good leader and a good business model, and it just wasn't there at that time. I hope we can make that come to pass at some point. Currently, there are 4 food hubs on Vancouver Island in various degrees of development. Some are very successful, some are still in the more or less construction phase. And so I think there is, hopefully there'll be future funding along these lines, and I will be glad to work with whoever steps forward to try to make that project happen. But it was just before I took this role on that I think the last application went in. But as I said, there were 2 rounds of planning that occurred on that, and then the wind kind of went out of the sails as far as I could see. I'd be glad to talk with you more about that. Hopefully we can have a chat soon in person, Richard, and talk more about some of your concerns and ideas.
All right, Reid and Tom, that looks like that's exhausted the questions, but thank you. There's a lot of rich discussion there, and I appreciate you answering as fully as you did. So thanks for your time this afternoon. I wish you a good evening, and we'll head on with the rest of the meeting.
Thanks so much.
Thank you all for the questions and your attention.
Pleasure. So we're going on to minutes for receipts. The Sewage Commission from June 11th. If we can get a motion for that. Okay, Kerr and Morin, and any questions? Any opposed? That passes. And now the Water Committee for June 11th. Moved by Wells. Second by Kerr. Any questions or comments on that? Any opposed to receipt? All right, and then we have ESC meeting minutes for June 17th for receipt. Thank you very much. Any questions? Any opposed to receipt? And that passes. And there are 2 recommendations here, and I'm just going to ask maybe the CEO just to give a little bit of context to those, please.
Sure. Thanks, Mr. Chair. So the first recommendation there, these are coming out of the Electric Services Committee. And the first recommendation relates to a proposal for a telecommunications tower on property located on Eleanor Road. The regional district's role in this would be to is being asked to provide a letter of consent to Innovation, Science and Economic Development Canada, ISED Canada, that the process has been followed, that ISED Canada puts forward for the process to be followed. And the Electric Services Committee had some discussion on that and are putting this recommendation forward today.
Great, thanks. And this is a vote of the areas. So I guess we'll need someone to move it first. Okay, and moved and seconded, perfect. Any discussions on the, okay, I see Director Harbour.
Yeah, thanks. And for the benefit of the board, and I see there's interested members here as well. So our just backtracking a little bit, what the CVRD is doing today is sending a letter of concurrence that the public consultation process has occurred as per our policy at the CVRD that we introduced a couple of years ago, but we're actually not commenting on other aspects on this one. With Duff Creek, there was a huge wave of concern about that tower. We did not see a similar wave with this one. And so for that reason, I think, yeah, I was okay with just sending the letter of concurrence. That doesn't mean that we don't have those other comments. It's just they were not as prominent this time.
Okay, thanks for that context. And seeing no further comments, vote of the areas. Any opposed? And that passes, and we'll move on to recommendation 2, and I'll maybe ask CEO if you could just provide just a very brief context on this before we discuss it.
Sure, thanks. So the regional district currently offers or delivers 2 services on Denman Island. One is called the Denman Island Water Local Service Area. The other is called the Graham Lake Water Service Area. And they're actually both served by the same source of water. And we've been working for several years to harmonize the fees and to bring together those 2 services in a more meaningful way, where it's more administratively advantageous to deliver them as one service. So what is being proposed here is a harmonizing of fees so that there is equity being brought to the table, so that both services are coming to the merger on similar footing. So the taxes paid into one service are being recognized, and that there is equity in the merger of those 2 services. So the second part of the recommendation would be then to see a bylaw come forward that would actually bring those 2 services together. So we just have the one water service on Denman Island at that time.
Okay, great. Thanks much. Appreciated. So I would move the recommendation, and if someone wants to second that. Okay, thank you very much. And we have the recommendation on the floor and a comment by Director Arbor.
Yeah, thanks. I know this item is watched pretty closely on Denman, as will the other one later on. And so essentially, if staff can just re-explain, because people might watch this one. So we've had the 2 services, and now we're bringing them back. There's a long history between those services and who got what grant and who paid for what and who got the short end of the straw. But from my understanding, this is an adjustment in the allocation from the $300,000 grant we got. Can we just have another 45 seconds from engineering or staff to explain the 23,000?
Sure, and I'm looking to either Mark Rutten or Lucy Wicharik on this one. Like Mark is more poised to answer that. Mark Rutten's our general manager of engineering services and supports these 2 services in particular.
Yeah, thank you. Through the CAO, through the chair. Like James explained, there's these 2 separate systems on Denman. They each have their own long history. One was regional district system for a long period of time. The other was an improvement district system, which has now been converted to a regional district system. Both systems are fed by the same source water, the same treatment, and essentially the same distribution system, although they remain separate. So we're bringing them together into one service. They essentially share almost all of the same infrastructure. And like James explained, in order to make the amalgamation or the combination of the 2 into one fair, we want to make sure that each service is bringing its fair share of resources to the marriage. So the $300,000 are community works funds. So they're, at your discretion to kind of allocate towards projects. And in this case, we're suggesting that there just be a recognition that a certain portion of those is for the Denman system, a certain portion is for the Graham Lake system, so that when they come together, there's been kind of an even on a population basis, or sorry, on the basis described in the staff reports, not purity population, that they're coming with equal resources.
Okay, thanks. And so just, if I may, just to clarify that fair share is not like our finger blowing in the wind. We actually looked at how is the fair share determined?
I'm sorry, I don't have the staff report in front of me, but there was a calculation of the reserves in reserve based, divided by the number of homes. So there was a reserve per property determined for each area. Then there was a recognition that one area had water meters installed while the other still had to have them installed. So that was subtracted for the one that had them installed. And that number was used to calculate the amount allocated towards the services. So yeah, there was some logic and thought put into that. That was described in the staff report. And that's what we feel makes it fair.
Thanks very much.
Yeah, thanks for that question, Mark. Thanks for the context there. I think that was really useful. And Director Hardy, you also have a question or comment?
Sorry, are we receiving a report or are we making a motion on recommendation number 2?
Recommendation number 2 is on the table right now.
Okay.
Just having comments on
So
that.
just clarification then with and further that staff bring forward a bylaw to merge the Graham Lake and Denman Island water local service areas with consent by the electoral area director being authorized for participating area approval. Could you maybe clarify more about what's being stated there?
Sure.
Because I guess the reason I ask is when we look at the vote for recommendation 2, it says all. And that's why I'm kind of wondering why, if everybody here is going to vote on recommendation number 2, but yet that one particular paragraph says under the consent of the electoral area director. Thanks.
Sure. So the and this goes back to the Local Government Act and the legislation, the rules that we're required to follow. The motion in front of the board here, the 2-part motion, it's a corporate decision because it is about a service change. So that's a corporate decision. That's not something that would default to the participants in a service. The second part of it there that talks about the bylaw coming forward and the consent by the EA director being authorized for participating area approval. When the board considers a service establishment bylaw or amending a service establishment bylaw, one of the steps before it can be adopted is that participating area approval is achieved. And that is done by way of either referendum, alternative approval process, a petition process, or in some cases, consent by the participant. So written consent by the electoral area director would be what is being recommended here.
Thanks. That helps.
All right, great. And another question by Director Arbor.
No, I'll just build it a little bit. It is, and for Dr. Hardy, I think maybe I didn't hear it, James, but the piece that many of my services in Area A actually default to the board for many decisions, because if there's only one service participant, then it defaults to the entire board to vote on. What's unique here is that this particular vote for the motion to trigger the process is a vote of the full board, but then I would be the only one signing and providing that authorization. So I'm glad you raise it. And so for those watching on Denman, what will happen here is the bylaws will come forward, but it's multiple steps. We'll have first and second reading and third reading and final adoption. And I did ask staff at ESC to make sure that hopefully that was done on June 20th when we consulted on Denman, that people are aware that this process is underway. So hopefully those comments were made in the committee. So it doesn't surprise anyone, but if people have serious concerns, I haven't heard them yet, but if people have serious concerns about that merger, I encourage them to voice them.
All right, thanks. That was a good discussion there. Mark, your light's on. Is there anything else you want to add? No, quickly turns it off. Okay, excellent. So this is a vote of the entire board. The motion's on the table. Any opposed to recommendation 2? Seeing none, that passes unanimously. And next we'll move on to the draft ag plan recommendations and next steps. And that's a motion for receipt, please. Okay, so moved and seconded. Thank you. And that's on the table. And I'll just pass it over to our CAO to introduce this item.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And pleased to introduce Lisa Kilpatrick to the table. Lisa is our Community Development and Resilience Manager, and Lisa will be introducing the staff report and the draft agricultural plan and recommendations and next steps. So Lisa.
Great, thank you. Through the chair to the directors, we do have Ione Smith on the phone on the Zoom today from Upland Agriculture, and she's going to be presenting the 5 goal areas and 22 recommendations to you. If you recall, we did bring the interim report to the board for information back in February to give the board the heads up that there would be some regional aspects to the to the findings from the public engagement. So what we're doing now is we're bringing this report to you for information. This report is the draft recommendations. So we're getting close to the end of the creation of this plan. Up to now, the result is significant. Sorry, the result is from significant work and contributions from farmers and processors and individuals and organizations and businesses that intersect with agriculture. They've given us plenty of their time to identify the priorities that will support the agricultural community moving into the future. This report was presented to the EASC last week, and the EASC approved us to move forward with final public comment. So in doing that, the report and the draft recommendations will be presented and posted on the website until September 30th for final comment. And then we're also exploring right now with several in-person opportunities to provide feedback. Further, the staff also requested that we move into the development of an implementation strategy. The strategy will be the cornerstone of the plan as we move forward. This implementation strategy will outline how we are going to implement the actions. In the fall, we'll be bringing the implementation strategy, as well as the final plan, to both the EASC as well as the board for approval. And the reason being is that because we do foresee that there will be some actions in there that will be regional in nature. So I'm going to pass it over to Ione. Is she on the?
Yeah, Ione, do
Perfect.
you have the ability to share your screen? I believe you.
I think I have to replace the current share, which I'll try and do.
Okay, let us know.
How does that work?
That's looking great.
Okay, fantastic.
It's all yours.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Lisa, for the introduction. I'm happy to be here virtually this evening to present to you the draft recommendations from the agricultural plan that we've been working on, as Lisa mentioned, for quite some time now. I am going to also, just for context, review the objectives of the agricultural plan process, describe the key components of the plan itself, and then I'll dive into the vision statement and the key recommendations before ending with a quick synopsis of some of the monitoring and evaluation indicators and discussing next steps. So just to recap, there were 4 key objectives when starting this project. The first was to review all key relevant information, and that was done through the production of a background report, which was quite lengthy. I believe it's over 100 pages, which just served to indicate how much work had been done in this area in the Valley. And so that was great to be able to have that wealth of information to use as some baseline. We then did a critical evaluation of the previous agricultural plan, which was completed in 2002, to determine which of those recommended actions were completed and which were partially completed and which were not completed. And that is an audited assessment of that plan, and that was presented through an interim report. Third was to engage with the agricultural community. We did extensive rounds of engagement. 2 rounds have been completed, and the third is now in progress. As Lisa mentioned, we did interviews. We completed in-person focus group sessions looking at key theme areas that were identified by the agricultural sector. We also presented this draft plan in person to the Comox Valley Farmers Institute. We presented it to the Mid-Island Farmers Institute, as well as the Comox Valley Farmers Market Association. And then we are providing the recommended next steps through this draft agricultural plan itself. And the key components of the plan, there is a vision statement. There are 5 key goals that serve to reinforce the vision, and 22 recommendations with specific detailed tasks embedded within each of those 22, which will help to ensure that the plan is implemented in an efficient and timely manner. We've also provided 6 key indicators for monitoring and evaluation, and lots of additional information in the appendices. The vision statement is lengthy, and it was built upon with input from the agricultural community, but the tagline for the agricultural plan is that agriculture is the heart of the Comox Valley. And it's based upon the perspective that the history of the region, including during pre-colonial times, when Indigenous food systems were abundant, will continue to influence this growing sector of the local economy today and into the future. With a mix of enterprises focused on a diversity of markets, the Valley's farms will continue to produce quality products. Farmers will be supported in their stewardship of land and water resources and become resilient to the impacts of climate change. The community will nurture a new generation of farmers with the capacity and resources to adapt and innovate so that a thriving agriculture and food system in the Comox Valley can continue to prosper. So with that vision statement in mind, we centered the agricultural plan along 5 key goals or themes. The first, and this was mentioned in previous discussions tonight, was looking at water resources. So specifically, the goal was to steward water resources to meet agricultural water needs. The second is looking at land protection and also support for producers. And so that goal is to maintain agricultural land protection policies and support for producers. The third is looking at the economic aspects of local agriculture, and so supporting actions to grow the regional agri-food economy. Fourth is to look towards changes that are happening with regards to climate and with regards to emergency preparedness and collaborate towards adaptation, mitigation, and preparedness. And lastly, to strengthen awareness of the Comox Valley agri-food sector through education. When we completed the agricultural plan and listed out the recommendations, we also identified priority levels. The priority levels assign a sense of timeline and urgency around the implementation of the recommendations. And they also serve to also indicate which sometimes need to happen in a sequence. So for example, ongoing actions are those that will require continued or renewed support over the next 10 years. High priority actions will require urgent action for progress to be made or for other actions to succeed. And the timeline there is to be started within 1 to 2 years. Medium priority actions are not critical for any actions to necessarily move forward, but they are still necessary and important and should be started within 3 to 5 years. And lastly, the longer term actions are less important, but still necessary for improvements in the local agricultural system and should be started within 6 to 10 years. So with that in mind, I'm going to read through the 22 recommended actions, and I will note that in the actual plan, there's a lot more detail associated with each of these. Specifically, there are bullet points which describe particular tasks that could be undertaken in order to achieve the actions. The first is to support alternative water collection and storage practices within the agricultural community. The second is to advocate for drainage upgrades and maintenance of existing agricultural ditches. The third is to encourage water stewardship and conservation practices. And the fourth is to ensure that if a regional watershed stewardship service is created, that it includes agriculturally specific outreach and extension regarding water-related issues in the region. The second goal is around planning and policy, and there are 5 specific recommended actions. The first is to maintain the agricultural coordinator position within the CVRD. The second is to reassess the role of the Agricultural Advisory Planning Commission in order to ensure that there is more opportunity for engagement and work within the implementation. The third is to enhance compliance and enforcement for farmland protection. The fourth is to update the regional growth strategy, official community plans, zoning bylaw, and other bylaws to be consistent with provincial policies, bylaws, and best practices, and that we recommend doing as and when needed opportunity presents itself. And then fifth is to continue to manage and reduce conflicts between producers, recreational trail users, and wildlife. The third goal is centered around economic growth, and there are 4 specific recommendations. The first is to seek opportunities for establishing a permanent location or multiple locations for a farmer's market, as well as for local food retail. The second is to develop an agri-food sector market assessment and a growth strategy for the Comox Valley. The third is to work to support succession planning and new entrants to ensure that there's longevity in the sector. And fourth, to support investment into services and infrastructure that expands regional food processing, storage, and aggregation capacity. And I know that some of these were mentioned in the previous discussion as well. Number 4 is looking at climate change and emergencies, and there are 5 recommendations here. The first is to incorporate agriculture into the regional district's community climate action planning initiatives and strategies. The second is to support sustainable farming practices and the protection of ecosystem services on farms. Fourth is to communicate with and involve agricultural stakeholders in emergency preparedness planning. Fourth is to continue to support wildfire risk reduction initiatives with agricultural stakeholders. And fifth is to increase solid waste management opportunities through recycling, composting, burning alternatives, and food waste reduction within the food system. The last goal is goal number 5, which is centered around education and awareness, and there are 4 recommendations. The first is to develop a regional food security plan for the Comox Valley. Secondly, to develop and maintain online agricultural resources that are readily available to the public. Third is to co-host an annual Comox Valley Agri-Food Tour. And fourth, to identify and support opportunities for school-aged children to learn about and engage in the food and agriculture system in the Comox Valley. I mentioned earlier monitoring and evaluation. It's critical to include indicators within agricultural plans that will allow staff as well as members of the agri-food sector to make sure that any implementation strategy that evolves is meeting certain measures and certain criteria of success. There are 6 indicators embedded within the agricultural plan, and they can be tracked. And we've provided some baseline data along with examples of what can be measured and how to assess success. And they are split into 2 categories: performance indicators and process-related indicators as well. And we've indicated that ideally they will be reported on an annual basis. I also noted that there's quite a lot of information in the appendices. We tried to keep the plan itself fairly concise, and so we moved quite a lot of material to the appendices. There's a glossary of definitions of terms. There's recommendations for specific changes to the OCP zoning bylaw and development permit guidelines. There's also a fulsome compilation of all the engagement results. We've also indicated opportunities for funding. This was also mentioned earlier by Tom Lodell. There's several opportunities for funding for some of these actions that are currently out there. And also we looked at a revised scope of work for the agricultural coordinator or agricultural planner position. So that's an overview of the plan itself. We haven't yet posted the recommendations online for public comment, but we'll do so later this week or next week. And then we will move the comments closed to September 30th. As was mentioned earlier, there was feedback that we should open it up to later in the fall. And then with regards to the final implementation strategy and agricultural plan, this will be done later in September and October. And then the open house event will be also later in the fall before finally bringing it back to the board likely in November. So that's it for my presentation, but I'm obviously here and happy to answer any questions that you might have. Thank you.
Thanks, Anna, and appreciate you joining us yet again this second day in a row. And we're going to start first with a question in the room, and that'll be Director Hardy.
Thanks, Sharon. Thanks again for the presentation from Ione and staff. I know through my involvement in the shellfish aquaculture industry over the years and having conversations with Environment Canada and climate change, there seems to be some concerns from ECC with regards to water quality in the estuary and in Bain Sound, and concerns with regards to agriculture activities maybe impacting marine water. So I'm just wondering, with this plan that's being developed or whatever, if there's been any conversations with the CBRD and Environmental Canada and climate change revolving around water quality, and how there might be some collaboration moving forward on how to try and mitigate or remediate some of these issues that are coming up for Environment Canada and the province of British Columbia. Thanks.
Thanks. Through the chair. So a lot of the recommendations that are under Section 4 around promoting sustainable agricultural practices, looking at additional waste management opportunities, would speak to some of those issues that you've raised. But we did not include aquaculture and marine production of food within the scope of this project. And that was really primarily due to some of the constraints from where the funding was coming from. But there are definitely recommendations within the plan that will allow for those conversations to occur.
did you want to follow up, Director Hardy? Okay. Should get the right light on.
Thanks, Chair. And like I said, I think it's really important that the BC shellfish aquaculture industry, the province and ECC maybe have some conversations with the CBRD revolving around the plan, and hopefully some of the priorities from this plan do seriously look at waste management so that we don't run into problems moving forward here. Thanks.
All right, thanks for that. And we'll go online to alternate director LaRock and then come back to the room.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And thanks very much, Ione, for that explanation. It actually was clearer a second time now that I've heard it. I was wondering, well, first I wanted to say that, you heard from the Agriculture Advisory Planning Commission last week, and there was anxiety around a couple of issues, but we also heard some really positive things, like the specific reference to the farmers market that is in the plan, the vision statement, the education and awareness that's being focused on. So I wanted to make sure we mentioned that. It's definitely a positive step forward in that regard. There was a lot of other good ideas there. I'm just wondering, because I was looking at the schedule and the staff report, how do the ideas that come out of that get in considered for this particular draft report? Where in the schedule would they show up? I know you're coming back to the AAPC at the end of the summer, or maybe it's early fall, but.
Definitely. So through the chair, we would do one final round of possible revisions after this next round of engagement is completed early this fall, prior to coming and presenting back to the EASC and the board. And I believe, and I can let Lisa speak to that, but I believe part of the scheduling is to ensure that there's some opportunity to include agricultural plan recommended actions and implementation in next year's regional district budget.
All right, thanks very much. No follow-up, Director LaRock?
Yeah, just one. I was wondering, thank you, Mr. Chair. I was wondering about an important point was raised about in this plan, do we want to deal with the fact that only a fraction of the agricultural land is actually farmed? And in fact, during the meeting, you might have been there, you heard an application of removal, so that public focus is not quite there, aligned with you are what you eat kind of thing. There seems to be that differentiation between the urban person and the farm. So how do you think the plan could address this particular piece, that only a fraction, like 30%, I think was what was mentioned? I don't know if that number is accurate or not, by the way.
Yeah, so in terms of the amount of land I'll just speak to land within the ALR, because that's what I have the most accurate statistics on, being farmed versus available for farming. It's recognized that throughout the province, there's a proportion of land in the ALR that's not currently being farmed, and that's not generally considered to be a problem because it really is a reserve and it's held for the future of farming. So if it's not currently being farmed, that's not necessarily a problem. But there is definitely an issue of people purchasing land within the ALR with no intention to farm it and simply setting up rural residential estates. That's a problem throughout the province. The province is working on some tools and policies to discourage this type of use. But unfortunately, there's really not much within the jurisdictional scope of local government, particularly regional districts, who don't have necessarily as much control over property taxes as member municipalities might. But to say that there is definitely some initiatives happening at the provincial level, and I think advocacy on the part of local governments would be really great to see, either motions put forward at UBCM or other types of advocacy support to discourage rural residential use of the ALR. Definitely.
Great point. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Pleasure, no problem. So we'll go back into the room and alternate Director Wells.
Thank you, Chair. I really do appreciate this, the report and the way it articulates out the goals and lays it out fairly well. But one of the things that it talked about was that sort of that recommended yearly feedback loop where it kind of comes back to the board as a report on various criteria. And I think that absolutely critical. So I really appreciate that. But I wondered about, it says like the last time that this had a major update was about 20 years ago. And just looking at, is there, having those yearly check-ins, but is there sort of a timeline that would be sort of best practices, whether that's 5, 10, or even 20 years again from now, to kind of come back and do a more fulsome review like we're doing right now?
Thank you. Yes, through the chair, this is intended to be a 10-year plan. So the previous plan was created, that was the first agricultural plan ever created for the region, and that was in 2002. And I would suggest that 20 years is likely too long. So I would definitely recommend that the next time a more fulsome review happens is within about a 10-year timeframe.
Thanks for that.
All right, and Director Brown, you had a question.
Thanks so much. And thanks, Ione, for the report. This is the first draft I'm seeing, so I'm happy. I'm so happy to see this happening. But I have a few questions. So in one of the appendix A, there's a mention of there's an outline, I guess, of the types of farms we have and their size and how many, which is interesting given the conversation we just had with Reed and Tom about size and ALR and amount of farming that's happening. So that we have 28 farms that are under 2 acres that have farm status is pretty interesting to me, and that most of our farms are under 40 hectares. In fact, most of them, I think, are probably under 4 hectares and still producing a ton of food. I'm curious why we have horses as an agricultural use, because I'm not aware of people like what's that about? If you could explain that. And then I have some other questions as well.
Through the chair, yeah, the reason why horses are included is because this data was just taken from the agricultural census from Statistics Canada. And so that is considered an agricultural use based on their data. We often see that horses are one of, a diversified sort of farming operation and not usually the only, but that's the reason why they're included is because it comes directly from the agricultural census. Okay, so that would be the advocacy piece we could do provincially, is to not if growing horses is considered an agricultural use of ALR land, we may want to advocate differently for that because it's not food. And then under goal 4, I just wanted to suggest that circular economy is included in that section. There's a whole lot of partnerships or and potentially our farmers institutes could assist with this, where there's a waste product from one farm that could be supporting the work of a different farm, and a huge variety of waste products are useful in other applications. So adding that to that. And then I didn't see anywhere the idea of like a meet your maker kind of event. And I think maybe in our coordinator, or maybe we just want to have it mentioned here so that we don't lose that thread. These are very useful events to match farms and people who are looking for particular types of foods and link them together and provide marketing opportunities and growth opportunities within the sector. And we had one, I don't know, maybe 15 years ago now, maybe 12. So it would be a good time to reintroduce that. And I think that's it. Thank you. Okay. Thank you. Yeah, just through the chair, on that last point, it's a great idea. One of the things we tried to do specifically with this agricultural plan is to only include actions where the regional district has a lead role to play. And I know with the Meet Your Maker, it's often led by the Ministry of Agriculture. And that's fine. We could include it as something that the regional district supports, but I just wanted to explain why those types of things haven't made the final cut.
All right, Ione, thanks again. And I don't see any further questions in the room or online. So we'll just thank you for your time and enjoy your evening, and we'll move on to the rest of the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right, so that we have a receipt motion on the table. So anyone opposed to receipt? Seeing none, that passes unanimously. And next we'll move on to strat planning session outcome from our report dated June 20th regarding the session, and I'll pass it over to our CAO to introduce the matter. Sorry, I didn't specify that it was A, B, and C, but yes, it was received by A, B, and C.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Chair. So strategic planning, it's a process in which an organization's leaders define their vision for the future and identify their organization's goals and objectives. At the regional district, we've undertaken strategic planning as a process that explores the goals and objectives for our core services applied by way of your 5 strategic drivers. Since the most recent local government election in October of 2022, you've set targets on numerous strategic initiatives and supporting operational service delivery, but you've also narrowed your focus and really narrowed in on housing. The May 30th, 2024 facilitated session advanced those interests related to non-market rental housing, and the outcome is presented in Alison Habkirk's summary document, and the covering staff report offers a means of achieving those non-market rental housing interests. I'm confident the recommendations, one, reflect the board input and feedback from May 30th, and secondly, sets a path forward that will make a difference in the non-market rental housing. Housing affordability, economic conditions, local government obligations and limitations. There are many complex and sometimes competing priorities in this topic area. May 30th brought many of those interests to the table. One example was an interest by some directors to take action and realize housing units immediately, whereas other directors want to take some time and put in place the legislative infrastructure to enable more lasting solutions. As a result, the staff report recommends some immediate, medium, and longer-term actions to find some balance amongst those various interests. And to that point, I'll briefly walk through the actions from the staff report. So the immediate actions, and we're envisioning those to be from July to the end of this year, would be to incorporate your May 30th feedback from that facilitated session into the 3 bodies of work that relate to housing. So 1 being the housing action plan, 2 being your homelessness needs assessment and community plan, and then 3 being the direct action feasibility study. We'll bring those reports back to the board for approval as they're completed. Also under the immediate actions, the CVRD, we would continue providing homelessness supports through function 451 and in conjunction with the Coalition to End Homelessness. Though there is an understanding that this is an area of provincial responsibility. And then lastly, we would continue to fund function 450, and that's about acquiring lands for emergency shelter and or supportive housing. In the medium term, we're suggesting, and this would be in between this fall and over the next couple of years, there's an opportunity exists to consider funding towards non-market rental housing through supporting community projects in a similar manner as the board funds homelessness supports projects. That would likely mean amendments or an amendment to your functions 450 and 451, the land acquisition service and or the homelessness support service. But with those amendments, it would provide for the necessary authority and resources to fund some of those initiatives that the board gives consideration for. And then over the longer term, and a lot of this would relate to the key actions that would come from the direct action feasibility study, and we'd be looking to incorporate them into your 2025 and subsequent financial plans. We'd want to confirm, this is the what and the how. So we'd want to confirm what it is you would want to pursue, whether that's providing supports to third parties to develop non-market housing, acquiring land or buildings for the non-market housing, or actually getting into the development, acquisition, and or operation of the non-market housing. And then the how would be the confirming the vehicle to support those actions. So is that work to be done in-house, contracted to a third party or a nonprofit, or establishing the housing corporation or agency that's been considered? The path being presented here through the immediate, medium, longer term actions, it's a realistic approach to your strategic interests. And again, I'm confident that you'll see productive results by supporting the actions. At this time, we're looking for board support for the recommendation in the covering report. And then over time, we'll look to you, the board, as subsequent decision points are brought forward. So, Mr. Chair, we're available for any questions you may have.
Thanks, CAO. Just looking to see if there are, it's a very comprehensive report by Ms. Hapkirk and by staff, and I think reflected well the session that we had together. So I'm just curious to see there's a comment, Director Kerr.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, thanks to staff and to Allison for putting together this report. Very, very thorough, and really did capture our discussion on the day. I remember towards the end, we were talking about, you know, the need to keep moving on this and keep pushing it forward, given the housing crisis that we're in, and so many people, especially in that non-market rental housing group that is such a need in the valley. So I like the next steps. I like the next way we're going to analyze and compare costs and look at these different outcomes. And you might not have an exact answer on this, but to staff, wondering when we can expect those next reports. Would we see all three reports at the same time, or kind of a layered approach in the hopefully near future? Thanks.
I don't have exact dates for you, but it will be over the early fall, and I don't think they're going to be all presented at the same time. There are three distinct bodies of work with a lot of overlap, of course, but they'll more than likely come in stages.
Okay. And we'll just go online then. The question from Director Brown.
Thanks, thanks, James, for this report. It's really great. It does capture our conversation. But I just want to check. So there's one of the things I raised in the planning session that's captured in Allison's notes is would like to see ratings for landlords and tenants. And I'm not sure that actually captures what I was trying to say, which is more about creating a database of rental properties and their landlords, and a database of renters that could be like a rating system. So people could review their landlord or review their tenant, and it might encourage more immediate long-term rentals, given that the regulations around short-term rentals have just changed, and now we have this flux of potential rentals coming. It could be something that increases the availability of potentially under market rentals, and I'm not sure whether 450 or 451 would allow for that. I'm not suggesting that the regional district necessarily needs to do that in-house, but does it allow for that funding to support someone else to do that? And it could even be, you know, anyway, someone with a room in their house that has capacity to have a renter.
I've noted in the workshop summary your comments there, and we can make that adjustment to speak more about the database for landlords and renters. I think that's probably more accurate to what you're speaking to. As for the eventual outcomes, I think that's where you'll see in the three bodies of work, but most specifically the direct action. You'll see there more specifics on how to make use of function 450 and 451, which may require amendments, and that's a process to go through. But I think that's where you'll see some of the detail in respect of really targeting into those non-market opportunities.
Okay, great. Thank you.
All right, and another comment in the room from Director Arbor.
Yeah, thanks. One of the things I might like to see in the immediate actions, because we are looking to gear up those services potentially in a very significant manner. At an earlier meeting today, we had a letter to the Village of Cumberland inviting them to join the turf field. So I'm wondering in the immediate action if we should engage with the town of Comox to see if they would join service 451. the homelessness service because they're currently not in it. I find it very unfair to Area A and to other service participants that there's free riding happening, right? So I'm wondering if it would be valid to add as an immediate action for us to delegate, as Doug DeMarzo did to Cumberland last September, to the town of Comox to see if they would be consider joining that service.
CAO, I don't know if you want to comment on that. I do see a response of some sort from Director Kerr. Perhaps we'll just perhaps on whether an approach like that would be within the scope of what was in the strat planning.
Certainly, function 450 and 451 of those are the two services that support the regional district's interests around housing and homelessness support and possibly non-market rental housing. So that is the legislative area that we work with, and the participants that make up those services and the purpose of those services. I believe those are the points of consideration when we're going to look to the direct action findings, and then the bullet in the medium term speaks to those amendments if needed to either broaden out the responsibilities or just the participants. I could see that being a direct activity or something to follow through on under the medium term, under that potential amendments to 450, 451. If the board's interested in taking a more immediate approach, you can certainly provide that direction to us, and we'd act on that.
And if that direction were forthcoming from this discussion here, would that require a motion to that effect?
Preferably, then it's captured in the direction going forward. That being said, I don't believe it would be lost if it's not presented today, because I do see that being a key component to the medium term activities.
All right, so we've got receipt on the table, so we'll continue with discussion, and then if there's a desire to make a motion to that effect, when we get to recommendations, we'll do that. So next is Director Kerr.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for the question. And as Director Arbor knows, I would love for Comox to be a part of the homelessness service personally, and as an elected official from Comox, I can't speak for our council. I'm not sure that sentiment would be the majority of our council, but certainly I would welcome that discussion. As someone who was personally at the table as simply a community member and physician at the first coalition meetings about 6 months before the coalition ever became part of a thing here in the Valley, this is an issue that I'm quite passionate about. I will just also note that Comox is not free riding. We do provide a significant financial sum to the homelessness support service in addition, kind of in a parallel track each year. And also we collect an affordable housing contribution from developers and purchase units in town that are specifically affordable units that we partner with nonprofits for. So Comox is actually doing a lot for affordable housing, and we're looking to do more, especially with the incoming projects that are happening. But I would welcome that discussion at our Comox table. Can't promise you one way or the other how the vote would go, but it'd be worthwhile discussion for us to have. And in the meantime, Comox will continue to work on affordable housing solutions. Thanks.
All right, thanks for that comment, Director Kerr, and we'll go to Director Morin.
Great, thank you, Chair. I guess I'm wondering if there could be a blend, a little overlapping piece between immediate and medium term in terms of the amending pieces. And the reason I ask is because there may be opportunities that come up that are time sensitive, where those amendments, it would be nice to look at the possibility of those amendments earlier. And I guess as an example, I'm just throwing this out here as a hypothetical, but say the emergency shelter service, we wanted to allow more latitude for maybe supportive, below market with that. like maybe a piece of land comes available. We pool our resources and there's a combination of below market and supportive housing or something like that. And if we're not looking at, I guess, massaging those services, the language in those services a little bit earlier on, we might lose out on some of those opportunities, but maybe those are things that we can fast track. I don't know, because it seems like when we review these bylaws and they take time. So I don't know. I'm not sure if, I guess I'm wondering what the timeline is for amending the functions. It sounds like all these other things obviously have to come before that. So I just wouldn't want to see that going on forever, basically.
Thanks for that. And I think that's why we're suggesting that medium term be initiated in September, but it could take some time before we're finally through what all those amendments and process developments might be. And yeah, we do recognize that there may be some urgency if projects are coming forward and the authority isn't yet granted. So I think that's why we're suggesting the initiating in September. But I do also want to be mindful of the work that is underway on the direct action study and want to ensure that that work is able to be completed and presented to the board. So you've got that full picture of understanding.
And I guess there may be also sort of these things that come up, but like a little bit like Director Brown was saying around, this landlord renter kind of directory. I know many of us have been talking about support for people who are overhoused to provide below market housing. So there's these other little opportunities that may come up. And so I'm thinking about all the different ideas that could come within that. I know that we want to be prepared for those amendments. We want to do all the work, but I'm just putting it out there that there may be things that come up that we might want a quicker timeline on. So thanks. Okay,
well, I think I see the CEO writing as we speak, so I think those comments are definitely taken down and recorded. I'll go to alternate Director Wells.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, great discussion. And I'll maybe just pick up a thread there just on a comment that was made about free riding or not free riding. And maybe there's an opportunity because there's stuff happening at this board that's kind of known and it gets a lot of the oxygen in terms of what's happening. But maybe there's an opportunity if a letter does go to the town of Comox, simply asking for an update on the activities that it's doing, because that way, it's not in a vacuum within the rest of the elected officials. I know I'm just an alternate, so I feel like I'm in a vacuum already today, but having that information at hand so that, we can see the good works that are being done and not feel like that there is that free rider, that sort of that reality versus perception kind of thing.
Okay, so something for the town to consider in terms of sharing information out to the community. John, Director Kerr, I appreciate you sort of giving a synopsis, but perhaps that'd be more useful. Director Arbour.
Yeah, I think why it's timely to have those conversations is what we found when we approached Cumberland with the artificial turf. They were approached at a time where a lot of the conversations around the new field, they were not a service participant. So I think they were looking at it with a different optic. And as we embark on securing that immediate medium-term and long-term commitments and direction from our board, I think if we learn anything from last year with that example is it's better for them to come in as service participants and be fully at the table in those discussions with a vote, rather than maybe if we advance our direction, they may say, well, we weren't part of the design. We don't like it. We're not coming in now, right? So I think for me, that's why I would put in as an immediate step. And I use the word free riding. We all free ride somewhere. Each of our jurisdiction has a free ride somewhere. I know I'm free riding on cemeteries. I don't participate in any cemetery service, but I know that people are still getting, from area are still getting, buried. So anyways, I just thought it would be good to voice that. I apologize if the term was a little strong, but at the same time, a strong term sometimes wakes us up. like function 451 is pretty consequential. And if we bring it to the $1 million or $2 million, we're not talking about small change that we're going to have to chip in. And if we left the town of Comox without that consideration later, I think it will create bigger regional problems down the road.
Okay, thanks. I think it was a really constructive discussion on that topic. I just want to thank everyone for the way that we conducted that. I don't see any further comments, and so we have motion for receipt on the table. I'll ask if anyone's opposed to receipt. Seeing none, just a recommendation if anyone cares to move it. Okay, moved and seconded. Any further commentary on the recommendation? All right, seeing none, we'll call the question. Any opposed? And that passes unanimously. And we'll move on next to directors' reports. So these are the opportunity for each of us to update the board on in any particular items we want to. There are, of course, as you know, written reports attached to the agenda, but this is an opportunity if anyone wants to add specific detail on any particular item they've been working on behalf of the board. Just feel free to flip on your microphone if you have something like that you'd like to add. It smelled that there was dinner, so perhaps that might be focusing people's minds. Director Brown, please go ahead.
Not to postpone dinner, but I neglected to correct my report. And so I just want to do that now. I did not attend FCM, but I did attend LGLA. But I also, the timing is unclear for me. I'm not sure when are the reports for the entirety of 2023. Are they from what's the date on the?
Apparently 1 year casting back from today.
June to June.
Roughly, I'll say June 25th to June 25th.
Okay, well, I have no idea what I was doing in that time, but I'll there were probably more things, but maybe not related to the board. So let's.
Well, I'm sure you can raise it at a future board meeting if any moments from last year just reoccur. Anything further, or I'll go to a comment in the room, Director Arbor.
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Brown. Same. So I went with 2023. So I would just like my report amended to strike out the FCM and LGLE conferences. Thanks.
All right. Seeing no further comments, we'll move on then. So that was for receipts. Motion for receipt on the table. Oh, sorry. Can I get a mover and a seconder on that? Moved. Excellent. Seconded. Anyone opposed to that? Can't imagine why. So okay, so that passes. And now we'll get into bylaws and resolutions. And first one is third reading for the Black Creek Community Center Contributions Service Establishment Bylaw number 47, amendment number 3 be rescinded. And maybe we talked about this at last week's meeting. Perhaps Lisa could provide an overview. This is a bit of a complex dance that we're doing with rescinding and then reinitiating.
Yes, so this bylaw was given 3 readings at the end of April, and this is the Black Creek Community Center Service Establishment. So as we do with service establishment bylaws after 3rd reading, we send them to the inspector for approval, and our feedback from the inspector's office was to adjust the maximum requisition as we had it written. So we've included both the old version and the new version. So it's simply just changing that one number in the maximum requisition to satisfy the inspector's comments.
All right, so this is essentially housekeeping and tidying up a small error, but it requires several stages. So we're now on rescinding and so moved. Seconded, thank you very much. And that's a vote of everyone. So any opposed to rescinding? Seeing none, that passes. So next we are going to be amending it at second reading to amend the maximum requisition following inspector review. So if someone cares to move that. Thank you. That's the amendment at second reading. Anyone opposed to that? Excellent. And now it's third reading as amended. If we can mover and seconder. People really don't want to eat. I'm pulling teeth to get things going here. Okay, so anyone opposed to that? Excellent. Okay, so we're now going to move into first, second, and third reading for the Grand Lake Water Local Service Water Tolls Bylaw number 826. Okay. Okay, perfect. That's first and second. Any comments on that? Director Arbor.
Yeah, thanks. Another watched item regarding the Graham Lake, and this will basically take one of the tolls to, I believe, $1,800 a year for water alone. So very noticeable on the march to potentially $3,300 a year or so for water for a house. So there's definitely concerns in the community around this number, but I want to justify my vote tonight. We're doing 1,800. The project doesn't have final approval to update the treatment plant. However, a lot of the core infrastructure, the pipes in the ground need to be replaced. If the project does not proceed, this will help build reserves towards those water pipe replacements. That is why I'm voting in favor today. So we would build reserves if the project doesn't go ahead. If it does go ahead, and the community will have a strong voice, and they have had a strong voice on that, we will go through some type of electoral assent process, and I think most people know that. Thanks.
All right, thanks for clarifying that, Director Arbor. So with that said, we're now sort of on first and second readings. It's been moved and seconded. Anyone opposed? That passes. And now third reading. Moved and seconded. Thank you very much. Any discussion? Anyone opposed to third reading? Okay, and now we're moving on to final adoption. This is for the Murrayville Fire Protection Service Establishment Bylaw number 484. And that's a motion for final adoption, please. Moved. Perfect. Any comments? Anyone opposed? And that passes unanimously. There's no new business. We are going to, I think, adjourn at this point to eat. And then when we return, we'll be going in camera. So members of the audience, you may want to just move on to that beautiful day outside that I can see through the window. All right, thanks. We'll be adjourned for sort of what